At this point it's been about 7 months since I made a video on the Japanese Pokemon mystery dungeon games that were fortunate enough to get a fan translation. Not only did this video do really well, it also was a ton of fun to discover what's behind the boundaries of a Japanese exclusive. Playing and making a video on these games just left me wondering what other games the world has missed out on. And thus, there I was, 6 months later, diving into the catalog of fan-translated Japanese exclusives. I don't even know what to say. The amount of games I want to cover is enough to keep this channel going for literal years. I found tons of cool games for pretty much every console. SNES, GBA, PlayStation, hell, even the Sega Saturn got some fan-translated games. But funnily enough, it was a PSP game out of all things that really caught my attention for this particular video. This is Nayuta Endless Trails, a fan-translated version of the Japanese Nayuta no Kiseki. To those familiar with the franchise, the words Kiseki and Trails might ring a bell, but to my knowledge, this game isn't exactly what you think it is. Trails, also known as Kiseki in Japan, is a series of RPGs by developer Nihon Falcom. It is part of their larger The Legend of Heroes franchise and it consists of several story arcs. Now, that's about as far as my knowledge goes when it comes to this franchise. I had never even heard of it, let alone played any of its games. However, from what I've gathered by browsing the official Wikipedia page and looking at some Reddit threads, Nayuta no Kiseki is in no way related to any of the existing story arcs. On the Wikipedia page it's officially listed as a spin-off, and to me it seems like they just smacked the Kiseki brand on it for brand recognition and ultimately sales. Everybody agreed that any individual can jump into this game without knowing anything about any backstory, and yeah, that's exactly what I did. Nayuta no Kiseki takes place at the center of Scientia Sea, Remnant Island. On this island lives our main character, Nayuta Herschel, together with his sister Urfa and his best friend Signa. For years upon years they've lived peacefully on the island, practicing their sword skills and functioning as handymen for the rest of the island. Even though they've lived on the island peacefully, weird things have been happening for quite a while now. Shooting stars and ruins have been falling from the sky continually, leaving behind these mysterious stones called star fragments. By shining a light on them in a certain way, people are able to see the phantom world of Lost Heaven. Nayuta is pretty much obsessed by this mysterious place, not only because he's a passionate amateur astronomer, but also because it was his parents' wish to find it before they tragically passed away. One day a mysterious tower lands in the ocean near the island and Nayuta and Signa decide to investigate. In here they find an unconscious fairy girl called Noi, who seems to be holding some sort of a gear. They barely have time to take care of her though, because Darth Sidious appears out of thin air accompanied by a masked swordsman. They are after the gear Noi is holding, and despite Signa's best efforts, they're able to steal it from her and book it shortly after. After recovering at Nayuta's house, Noi cannot believe this thing she calls a master gear was stolen, and she opens up a mysterious portal that has been in Nayuta's backyard all along. Nayuta and Signa cannot let this girl fight Darth Sidious and the Masked Man alone, and thus they chase her through the portal, where they find the lost heaven they were looking for in the form of a world called Terra. Noi reveals the man in the robe is called Zext, and he's stolen the master gears to destroy the world. He will use the master gears to shut down the power of the stars at the temple of each of the 4 continents, which controls the climate in these different continents. Doing this will change the climate for the worse, spawning more monsters, cause natural disasters, and will eventually mean the end of this world. Nayuta and Signa are not going to let Noi take this challenge on her own, and thus they team up with her to take back the master gears from Zext and save Terra. And yeah, that's pretty much what the game is all about. Bad guy does bad guy things and you're supposed to defeat him. It's a pretty standard story, but the execution and the little turns and twists to the story make it a really unique and very enjoyable experience that complements the game structure very well. Besides, the story isn't even the focal point of the game. While the game spends a good chunk of time inside of cutscenes for the sake of story progression, most of the player's time is spent on steering Nayuta through these fantastic, action-packed levels in order to reach and obtain the next Master Gear. Before even getting into the gameplay itself, I just have to talk about the game's visuals. It's really the first thing I noticed upon starting up the game for the very first time. Despite running on 30 FPS rather than 60 because of the PSP, the game looks incredible. If this isn't the best looking game on the PSP, then I don't know what is. From the cutscenes to the levels you take Nayuta into, everything is lush, gorgeous and incredibly detailed for a PSP entry. At any given time the screen is just exploding with colors and fantastical designs that are a true feast for the eye. I especially like what they did with the different camera angles both in the cutscenes and inside of the levels. The different perspectives make the game's visuals pop even more, zooming in and out at what feels like the perfect moment. No level feels the same because of this, and during the cutscenes I sometimes felt like I was watching some animated movie, rather than playing a game. It's just so well done. Some of the best usage of camera angles I have ever seen. One thing I do have to sneak into this section though is the weirdest cutscene in the game. After the prologue, this random ass anime intro starts playing with music that will probably get me copyright claimed, and I was just so caught off guard by it. The art style doesn't fit the game at all, and it feels like I'm watching an intro to like an anime series. Not that it's a massive inconvenience or anything, but it's just so weird, man. So weird. Where was I? Oh, right, gameplay, right, this is a video game. Like I mentioned during the story section, Zext is using the Master Gears to shut down the power of the stars at the temple of each of the 4 available continents. And now it is your task to reclaim these Master Gears and save Terra. Each continent can be accessed one by one by this Mario Bros like overworld map, with each of them having 3 regular levels, a temple level separated into 2 parts, and then a boss fight at the end. After clearing all 4 continents, you'll be able to descend into Terra's underground layers to unlock 2 additional worlds as well, so there are plenty of levels to play through. Your main objective in every level is very simple. Plow your way through the monsters and reach the teleportation device at the end. But there's so much more to this gameplay than just a hack and slash adventure. The developers tried to utilize the levels to their maximum potential, and they truly have succeeded at accomplishing just that. Not only do you have to defeat monsters in order to make your way through a level, these developers got incredibly creative when it comes to moving around these levels as well. It starts off rather basic by making your way through these forest levels that do look really cool, but eventually you'll find yourself messing around with cool ass water wheels, teleporters and Venus flytraps. They even managed to design ice and wind levels in such a way that it didn't actually piss me off, which is a huge accomplishment. Even though they are meant to serve as obstacles, they are relatively easy to master. Moving around on the slippery ice or being pushed back by gusts of wind while fighting enemies was a difficult challenge, but I always ended up feeling impressed by the level design rather than being annoyed by the mechanics. The level design is elevated even more by our lovely little fairy Noi. As you've probably noticed by now, she accompanies Nayuta in every single level. And this isn't just for combat related reasons, but also to overcome various obstacles the levels throw at you. On his way to the temples on every continent, Zext has defeated and locked up the guardians of every temple. Upon freeing them, they grant Noi their powers, which will come in very handy in the levels. Whether that's in the form of breaking huge objects, walking on water or lava, bridging gaps by clinging onto these gears, or rapidly climbing up walls like a hamster in a hamster wheel, each of these powers adds a whole new level of depth to these stages. Suddenly each and every corner could possibly be accessible and contains something you want or need. And you know what the best thing is? The game makes you want to check every single corner of every single stage too. Every stage has a set of objectives for the player to complete. In every stage you'll have to find 3 purple crystals, find 1 or 2 chests and accomplish one main objective in order to get up to 3 stars at the end. While the objectives are meant to give you an additional fun challenge in these stages, like beating the stage in a set amount of time or taking damage 10 times at most, it's the other 2 objectives that make you explore the entire stage. You see, each and every one of these crystals and chests can be found in pretty much every corner of every stage. Now, while these might seem like additional objectives the player might not necessarily care about, you'll find out why this isn't the case at all later on in the video. Their rewards are so valuable that you really want to collect as many as you can, and thus I pretty much explored every corner of every level. And I still ended up missing objectives like half of the time, but that doesn't matter. By making these objectives worthwhile, the developers knew players would be actively looking for them. and thus they took the opportunity to hide them behind the mechanics of a certain stage or any of Noi's cool ass abilities. Making your way towards these objectives never becomes stale, they use the existing mechanics and level design to perfection, and at the end you get a valuable reward? Sounds like perfect stages to me. While I absolutely love these levels on their own, where Nayuta no Kiseki truly distinguishes itself is in its 4 seasons per continent to play through. At first you'll only be able to play through 1 season per continent, but with every master gear you'll obtain, you'll be able to manipulate the climate with this device called the Astrolabe, and unlock the 3rd, 2nd and even a 4th season on a 2nd playthrough. In case you're interested in going that far, that is. The reason why I love these seasons so much is because they essentially contain the same stages, while simultaneously not containing the same stages at all. Changing seasons will completely change a stage you've already played through, while still feeling familiar every time. The color palette, background vegetation, landscape, routes, enemies, music and obstacles are changed, added or removed to characterize each season. The feeling of exploring familiar stages again but through a different scope makes for such a unique but cool experience. These new stages aren't mandatory at all, but like I said earlier, you'll want to grind these out for the valuable rewards that will definitely help you on your journey. Speaking of these valuable rewards, I think it's about time to get to them, because exploring these cool ass levels is only half of what this game has to offer. The other half is, and you might have already thought of this, fighting quite a number of enemies. You fight these enemies with a weapon and Noi assists you with her magical powers as well, with some of them being weapon resistant and some of them being magic resistant. Like I said, fighting enemies is like half of what you do in this game, and luckily that turned out to be just as enjoyable as the exploration. Not only does each and every enemy have cool and unique attacks that will absolutely destroy you if you aren't careful, their designs are also really cool and creative. Their designs aren't all that serious, and I think that's what made me like them so much. You'll be facing enemies like rocket beetles, these dissipating mosquitoes, fat dragons, fat guys with a random flower on their head, literal transformers, and my personal favorite, the jellyfish with a smiley face. None of the enemies are meant to be these super scary beings, and you can tell the developers had a lot of fun with designing these. One really cool detail is the addition of an enemy info menu. Upon defeating an enemy you can see what level they are, what they drop, and they even included a brief description. I didn't really use this a whole lot, but it's a cool little detail they surely put a lot of work into. Either way, fighting these enemies is an absolute blast. All of these enemies have different gimmicks and some of them are pretty much guaranteed to damage you. Whether that's by shooting some sort of projectile, ramming into you with the speed of light, or just the sheer range of their attacks. They somehow managed to keep introducing fresh and new moves up until the very end too, which is actually pretty dope. And it's not just this variation that satisfied me, their difficulty felt perfect too. I'd personally highly recommend playing on hard mode, which is what I played on. Their health bars and damage output were easy enough to be manageable, but they did require a bunch of strategy and sweaty palms, which is just how I like it. This is especially the case when you step on these particular circles. Upon doing so, every exit will be closed off and you're just supposed to brawl it out against a bunch of enemies. You have very little room to move and thus you're gonna be taking a bunch of damage if you're not careful enough, which actually made for a very fun challenge every single time. Noi's walking on water superpower can aid you in avoiding damage as well, since it also functions as a shield. But you have to be careful, it will use up Noi's stamina and will be completely broken upon getting hit once. So you'll still have to be very careful while dodging multiple attacks at once. Now, while there are a couple of things left to talk about when it comes to these enemies, they have to do with other combat related aspects, so I think it's about time to further elaborate on how to actually fight these enemies. Like I said, you fight enemies with a weapon and you can collect different pieces of equipment for both you and Noi that give bonuses to your strength, defense and intelligence. And just to clarify, intelligence determines the base damage of all magic attacks in this particular game. The weapons feel very balanced and whenever a weapon has a lot of strength, they make sure you're unable to swing it as quickly as the weaker weapons. This makes for gameplay where you always have to pick your fights and not jump into anything too quickly, because you will get punished by whatever enemies you're facing. The weapons and pieces of equipment being balanced is far from the best thing about this system though. The best part is that the different weapons and pieces of equipment are actually displayed in the overworld. You give Noi some goofy dress and Nayuta an enormous sword and it all has a good looking overworld sprite. Far too many games like these just can't be asked to actually display what the characters are wearing, and it's little details like these that do put a smile on my face. So how does one obtain these combat related items? Well, there are a number of ways to do so, and this is where I'm actually going to get to the crystals and chests. As you might have expected, you can find these items in the aforementioned chests, but the chests have another function alongside the crystals and the main objective in a stage. Depending on how many of these requirements you meet, you get up to 3 stars per stage. These stars are then dumped on some sort of a scorecard, and upon reaching the red flag, you can go to Remnant Island's beach to have your swordmaster teach you a new fighting skill, add additional bonuses to chaining together lots of attacks, or give you a combat related item. But that's not all. You see, Remnant Island, aka Nayuta's hometown, functions as a bit of a hub world, and obviously a weapon shop on this island fits the game very well. Especially earlier on in the game, the weapons in this shop are definitely worth your money. A thing to note here is that Nayuta and Noi have different combat related shops on Remnant Island. Nayuta has a regular combat shop, but you can buy Noi's equipment at a simple grocery store. They made a bit of a joke out of it and turned Noi's equipment into doll's clothes because she's incredibly small. Whenever Nayuta purchases any equipment for Noi, the shopkeeper will just playfully laugh at him for playing with dolls. To add to that, the chests inside of the stages don't just drop the weapons and equipment. On a few occasions they also drop a ball of cloth and some ore like, for example, an ember. You can then proceed to give these to the 2 shopkeepers in order to increase their stock. In terms of stats and such, I didn't really think it was worth it. The stuff you get from the chests and the swordmaster truly outshine the increased stock, but I mean, I like the idea at least. However, in order to actually buy these combat related items, you need money. And making money is a whole system on its own really. Inside of the levels you get a certain amount of mira, which is the currency in this game. By beating enemies, finding them scattered around the level, and breaking the crystals gives you an okay amount of mira as well. Then, after completing the level, you get mira based on how many objectives you completed as well. However, the main way you make money in this game is way cooler. At some point a museum opens up in Remnant Island. In here you can donate stuff like ancient artifacts, dead flies, animal bones, etc. The real expensive artifacts can be found in the chest, but most of the items you'll be donating can be found inside of the many breakable objects in the stages. These objects are aesthetically very pleasing, but the fact that they can actually aid you in your gameplay just made me break them all in every single stage. I mean, who knows, there could be something worth money inside of it. One thing worth mentioning here is that Noi's equipment can actually help here. Depending on what she's wearing, she can actually get boosts to things such as experience, health drops, and also these kinds of collectibles. I forgot to even think about using this like half of the time, but I do think it's a cool feature that could be utilized very well by any individual smarter than me. Other than that, there is one more way to obtain these items which I just have to mention. At a very early point in the game, you can adopt this stray dog from the beach. As the game progresses, you can then buy him a doghouse and toys and such, and as a reward he'll be waiting with some items at your house after every stage you complete. Like I said earlier, it's these cool little details that make me very happy. Anyway, aside from giving you a lot of money for the items you donate, the research lady at the desk will give you some additional items after donating a certain amount. And what's even better, throughout the game more and more exhibits will open up in the museum where you can see the items you've actually donated. These can be dead beetles that then come to life, or these pieces of armor on armor stands, which is pretty cool to check up on every now and then. Now that we're looking at an exhibition of ancient animals and artifacts, you'd almost forget I was talking about the combat system. While Noi adds a whole lot to the level design with her magical powers and stuff, these powers can of course also be used in combat. Every so often, a stage will have this particular icon above it, which means Noi can obtain a new power somewhere inside of this stage. Upon stepping on one of the aforementioned battle circles, you'll fight what is essentially a mini-boss in the form of some regular enemy with boosted health, size and strength, with them only using the power you're trying to defeat them for. Noi's magical powers aren't anything special compared to other games, but they do have some cool animations and are very helpful in defeating enemies. These attacks are once again based on the 4 seasons. Winter type attacks freeze opponents, spring attacks make enemies confused, summer attacks paralyze, and autumn attacks cause poison. These attacks go up to a maximum of level 5, with each level increasing the damage output and the amount of power points. You can spam the moves all you want, but do not make it broken. They've made sure the moves have a regeneration time that fits the power points and power of the move as well. Weaker moves take shorter to recharge than more powerful moves, and they logically have more power points as well. At the start you only have one magic slot, but as the game progresses you'll unlock additional slots, one of them being hidden in a singular chest in a certain stage. Do you understand why these chests are so worthwhile to look for yet? The more slots you'll unlock, the more likely it is that at least one of the equipped powers has a bit of power points left to aid you in combat. Noi's magic system isn't anything out of the ordinary or anything, but her attacks were really helpful in doing damage and or stunning an enemy when there were a bunch of them charging at me. The only real mistake the developers made with her powers is during the boss fights. While I'll talk about those separately in a bit, I just want to mention that Noi's attacks are pretty much pointless in any boss fight. You can't freeze or paralyze bosses, which I was kind of able to understand, but her attacks do rarely any damage to any boss aside from this ugly ass fish. I think they figured the boss fights would be too easy if you had both Noi and your own weapon to damage bosses with, but wouldn't you be able to solve that by just giving them more health or having them do more damage? I just kind of dislike Noi being so ineffective in boss fights, while she makes up for like half of the combat in the regular stages. There is one more thing I should mention that relates to everything I've just talked about: the side quests. Like I mentioned during the story section, Nayuta works as a handyman and thus people will ask you to solve their issues. Look, I won't lie, aside from the 2 mandatory side quests at the start, I didn't do a single one of these, because the game never incentivizes you to do so. However, while writing the script I figured out they give out some solid rewards like expensive collectibles, weapons and even powerful spells for Noi. The quests range from simple stuff like collecting items or beating enemies to defeating upgraded versions of every single boss. I don't know man, the main story itself just was a lot of fun and I never felt the need to collect some additional items. The stuff provided by the rest of the game was just more than enough for me to beat it, which kind of defeats the purpose of these additional objectives. That bummer just leaves me with one combat related mechanic left to talk about: the health. Now, while I wouldn't bother talking about this in any other game, the health system is actually really unique in this game. You can get some additional health from the breakable objects, with Noi's equipment being able to boost the drop chance, but the real health system comes in the form of these lunchboxes. By gathering ingredients from defeating monsters, buying them from the shopkeeper on Remnant Island and finding some very rare ingredients in these flowers in stages, your sister is able to make you these lunchboxes at your house that essentially function as health potions. Just like with Noi's and Nayuta's equipment, they've done the weird thing with collecting soil to increase the shopkeeper's stock, which I'm kind of on the fence about since you can easily miss out on them. Either way, these boxes don't just add health, they temporarily boost a certain stat upon eating it as well. Not that I ever used them for that or noticed any significant difference, but hey, it's a thing, you know? And last but not least, they give you a varying amount of experience as well, because just like any other RPG, there's a level up system in this game as well. Quite early on in the game you can buy some more advanced cookbooks for additional, better recipes, and as soon as you have your sister cook a recipe for you at least once, you'll be able to make them yourself as well. This way, you don't have to run back to your sister all the time. You start off with a singular lunchbox, but by reaching certain amounts of unique recipes, you'll unlock additional boxes because your sister assumes you're a fat ass. I truly think this is one of the more unique health mechanics I have ever come across, and finding or buying the different ingredients and tactically crafting them for both health and experience was just fun to do. Big props to the developers for making a health system mechanic fun. I didn't even know that was possible. And that just leaves me with one thing left to talk about: the boss fights. Nayuta no Kiseki's bosses are nothing short of fantastic. Where I thought the level design was an absolute piece of art, these boss designs blew me away even more. Graphically, these bosses look absolutely amazing, and their different phases are incredibly well designed both visually and in terms of attacks. You fight a lot of bosses in this game and all of them are equally well designed. You'll find yourself dueling a laser shooting robot crab, these ancient stone guardians, and even a fire demon that transforms from a head to a lava monster to a lava demon soldier. They truly utilize everything both the environment and the monsters themselves have to offer, which makes for such a cool and unique experience. Whether you're opening up a fish's mouth to fight its tongues, or the lava head using the environmental pillars as feet to stomp you with, all of the ideas are equally well executed and equally amazing. They also made very good use of Noi's powers. Some of the bosses have these phases where you're supposed to grab a tail with her powers or run through the lava floor with her shield in order to even damage it. It's just so incredibly well done, man. I can't emphasize that enough. And then I haven't even mentioned how much fun they are in terms of gameplay either. The game tells you absolutely nothing in terms of how to damage them or how to dodge their attacks. Figuring out you have to, for example, use Noi's power can only be done by trial and error, which is just how I like it. You learned what to do and how to deal with their attacks in phase 1, well, good luck on phase 2. We ain't telling you shit and you'll have to reset to the start of the fight. Playing on hard mode, these bosses are really hard. They do quite a bit of damage and your damage output against big health bars is very low. The fights can feel incredibly unfair with their seemingly random attack patterns and inability to dodge attacks at times due to funky hitboxes or wrong inputs, but that feeling when you finally overcome one of them is so fucking good. I'm gonna be brutally honest here, I don't think I have ever been this impressed by boss fights in ever. And I have fought against some fantastic bosses in a number of games, so that truly says a whole lot. This is truly the most outstanding aspect of this game to me, and it's not even close. And that just leaves me with one thing. The spoilers. This game's story has some pretty cool twists and turns, so if you're interested in playing this game, this is where you should skip to the section of the video that should easily be accessible by clicking on the timestamp in the description. Now that I've given you some room to skip to the next section, let's spoil some stuff. So let's go all the way back to the start of the game, where we first follow Noi through the portal to Terra. Before Noi even tells us anything about this world, we see this lady that's fast asleep inside of this coffin. Noi tells us her name is Lady Kreia. She's been asleep inside of this coffin for forever, and it is her duty to protect Kreia at all costs. Now while this seemed a little random to me at first, it all starts to make sense rather quickly. After freeing the Guardian of the First Continent, you find out Zext is actually the leader of the Mythos, the godlike beings who created the world in the first place. And when Kreia actually wakes up from her eternal sleep after beating the idol of the Second Continent, you find out she's actually Zext's daughter, which will obviously play a big role in the story's conclusion. To my surprise, the other important plot-related character turned out to be Nayuta's best friend Signa. His role in the story starts as early as when we first meet Zext and his right hand. Like I said during the story section, Signa tries his very best to stop them, but doesn't succeed. After this, he just isn't the same Signa, and at the end of the First Continent, he's just about had enough. He tells us that he felt a strange presence while fighting the guys, so he wants to battle them alone and tells us we're too weak to take on this powerful enemy. After this, Nayuta and Noi pretty much clear the continents and try to stop Zext on their own, with Signa only returning once at the Fourth Continent's temple, just to tell us he's leaving forever. What a great guy. Now, while I thought this was the most random subplot, it all starts to make sense in the grand scheme of things. On your journey you figure out Zext is shutting down the power of the stars with the Master Gears in order to return Terra to its true form. Doing this in all of the continents will unleash the seal of something that will not only completely destroy Terra, but is supposed to destroy the Earth as well. However, to be able to use this something, Kreia's and Signa's powers are required. They are the key to deleting humanity forever. But Signa is our best friend and Kreia has been on our side ever since she woke up. So how is he going to force them to use their powers? Well, let me tell you, they joined the evil side willingly. Kreia has been suffering from memory loss ever since she woke up, but when Zext and his right hand come to collect her as the key, she remembers it's her duty as a Mythos to unlock the seal and that the Mythos' future lies not with humans. After which, she just willingly leaves with them. Signa, however, has been on Zext's side all along. His disappearance after the clash with that guy wasn't a coincidence, because not only is it revealed that the masked guy is Zext's son, Lord Salam, but he is also Signa. Salam used to be asleep next to Kreia, but due to an accident he was split up into two. One Lord Salam, one Signa. Due to memory loss, Signa ended up on Remnant Island and became Nayuta's friend. But during the clash with Salam, Signa recognized his own strength, and he just had to find out what the deal with that was. After he runs away at the first temple, you then follow him to the summit and watch a cutscene of him clashing with Salam once again. But this time, you never get to see how the fight ends. Salam explains they both used up all of their strength in this fight, after which they were able to reunite once again to regain their full power. So Kreia and Signa, aka Salam, are on Zack's side. But why are they okay with him destroying the world? Well, this is all revealed when Kreia shows you this thing called the Ancient Memory. Once upon a time, Mythos and humans lived together in harmony, but the humans then used the Mythos technology to start war upon war. Hundreds of thousands were killed, the planet got semi-annihilated, and last but not least, Zext died in the process. Terra was then created as a temporary planet to preserve life forms and other things the Earth had to offer, to one day recreate the Earth and return it to its former state. And this is exactly what Zext, Kreia and Signa are trying to do. It's not some sort of an evil plan, they're actually trying to restore the Earth to its fully functional form. But sadly, this means wiping out everything that currently exists. They already abandoned their mission once when they noticed some of humanity had survived and built up a new life, but the Earth keeps on collapsing and thus they believed it's the only way to fix things. Nayuta believes there has to be another way to save the world, and thus he chooses to still go after them to stop them. Zack then starts the recreation and upon confronting him, he just says, "Lol, no," and blasts you off the building. There's still some good left in Kreia and she safely lets you descend back to the Earth instead of falling to your death. Which, yeah, it's pretty nice I guess. Once Noi and Nayuta have woken up, we get back to Terra and see the Star Garden has descended into the underground layer of Terra. After which they use the aforementioned astrolabe to descend themselves as well. Noi explains the continents and the animals are preserved above, and this is where the humans were supposed to be preserved. Except, they managed to save no one. From here on out, you'll be able to play through two more worlds, Alexandria and Stellarium, where Zext is planning to finalize the recreation. In order to be able to descend to Stellarium, you'll need to take down the very guardians you freed earlier, in order to obtain the Stellar Gears that'll make the astrolabe go down even further. They were created by Kreia and Salam, and now that they are on Zack's side, these guardians obviously are too. Upon obtaining them, Noi and Nayuta then travel to the Stellarium in order to get to the Planetarium, which is where Zext will execute the recreation. On your journey to this planetarium, you actually confront both Kreia and Salam in respectively Alexandria and Stellarium, with them actually wanting to believe in a different solution after a heated conversation and one of the hardest 1v1s in the entire game. For real, this fight is without Noi, and I probably reset for over 4 hours. Zext however doesn't budge as easily. Because of Kreia and Salam having their doubts, he decides to just take the power from them and pretty much kill them for the greater good. They're not actually dead however, they both turn to stone, which is their near death state. They can both be saved by defeating Zext, so not all is lost. Just before completely turning to stone, Salam opens up the portal that leads us to the planetarium, where we will face off against Zext. His plan is to attach the planetarium to the Earth and use it as a core to recreate the Earth like it once was. He starts the recreation, but while he's at it, he decides it's time to wipe us out once and for all. After beating him in one of the hardest boss fights of the game, you'd think it's over, but there's a twist. Remember the Ancient Memory? Yeah, this dude isn't actually Zext. It's his memory stored into the planetarium's idol. After realizing this is the case, he cannot let his mission as the planetarium idol fail. He must fulfill the recreation. So he basically decides to go sicko mode and turn into this absolute fucking monster of an idol. I used up 3 entire lunchboxes in the fake Zext fight, and thus I only had one left for this fight. I had no idea I would be doing back-to-back boss fights after all. This boss fight has like 4 phases divided into 8 phases, if that makes any sense. It's fucking hard, fucking chaos, looks fucking amazing, and above all, is the absolute highlight of the game. I had to reset the entire 2 fights in order to go into this idol fight with more lunchboxes, but once I beat this final idol fight, I literally... I screamed like a little girl, okay? I'm not proud of it. This boss is such a sick final boss. After defeating him, there's only one thing left to do. Save the world from demolition. They come up with the idea to connect the planetarium to the core of the Earth and use the immense power of the astrolabe to save it. However, it is then revealed Noi is actually the counterpart of the idol of the planetarium. she is the idol of the astrolabe itself. And thus, in order to save the world, she has to sacrifice herself. After an emotional goodbye, she basically gets sucked up into the power of the stars and saves the Earth from collapsing. Terra has used all of its power to do so and has now turned into stone. While the Earth is now saved and everyone can live happily ever after, Kreia and Lord Salam set their sights on fixing the broken astrolabe and bringing back our beloved Noi. And this is where the story ends. Or well, it kinda does. After this, you'll unlock the after story, which can end in 5 minutes or 5 hours depending on your own decisions. You'll unlock an entire new season in every continent with stronger enemies, and every continent's idol has to be tamed again with them having more health than in the main storyline. The reason you'll actually want to play this is because playing the after story will unlock the game's true ending. The after story takes place 1 year after saving the world. Nayuta's talking to a friend of his called Lyra at the beach when a light suddenly falls out of the sky. The two of them run towards it and it turns out to be Noi. However, this is a completely different Noi that doesn't remember who you are. After being created, an unknown voice called her to Earth to bring back Nayuta to Terra. Kreia and Signa were fixing the astrolabe, but then a problem occurred. They decided to dive into the astrolabe's inner world to check out what's wrong. But something happened while doing so and now their souls are trapped inside, causing them to go back to sleep. To save them, you need to head into the astrolabe yourself and beat 2 consecutive bosses. The first of them being the astrolabe idol that has gone crazy because of the abnormalities and has defeated Signa and Kreia. And last, but not least, Noi. Noi explains that she didn't fully disappear because she couldn't. When she was about to disappear, she thought of all the friends she'd have to miss and thus she wasn't able to fully pull the trigger. As a result, she caused these current abnormalities in the astrolabe. Now, a year later, she's made up her mind and she's ready to fully disappear in order to stop the abnormalities and save Kreia and Signa. However, the only way to make this happen is by defeating her real form in a relatively easy but very cool boss fight where she alternates between the 4 seasons based on her HP. After defeating her, Signa and Kreia are saved, but Noi sadly has to disappear. However, the voice that sent the new Noi to Earth reveals itself to be the reformed planetarium idol, and as a last thank you, he placed old Noi's soul in new Noi's body. He then says it's time for Terra to move away from Earth forever and that Terra doesn't need to meet us anymore in order to fully function. And thus, Signa, Kreia and Noi choose to head back to Earth with Nayuta and live happily ever after. And yeah, that's the entire story. There were some pretty cool twists and turns that I didn't see coming at all. Signa being Salam, Zex being a robot, the plan not being evil. I didn't expect any of those things before they were revealed. I think the after story is a little weak and its climax felt a little basic and predictable, but I got some good boss fights out of it at the very least. Overall, the story isn't anything out of the ordinary, but it's very engaging, and even though it ends a little weak, I found myself wanting to figure out what would happen next at any point, which is more than enough to consider it a success to me. With the spoilers out of the way, I think that's about all I had to say about this absolute gem of a game. I truly cannot think of anything overly negative when I think about this game. Everything just feels so well thought out, from the ideas to the actual execution. The game looks gorgeous, the level design is flawless, the actual gameplay is an absolute blast, the bosses are some of my favorite bosses of all time, and accompanied by the beautiful music throughout the game that has been playing in the background of this entire video. It's an almost perfect JRPG. Sure, I got some minor complaints like the sheer amount of mechanics being a little too much at times, enemy hitboxes being a little wonky, and the depth perception being a little off on some of the jumps, but these things happened so infrequently that I didn't even bother writing about them in the first place. After story included, this game took me about 25 hours to beat, and I really didn't want it to be over, which is something that actually rarely ever happens to me. A huge shout out to everybody involved in translating this game. Without them, I wouldn't have ever been able to play this game. That is, if they didn't release a PlayStation remake in Japan a day before I started playing. That will also be released worldwide in 2023. Despite beating it on PSP, I will be buying the remake without a doubt, and I'd highly suggest you do the same if you're looking for a highly addictive experience. This game exceeded any expectation I could have had, and I'd confidently say you should be expecting more Trails related videos in the future. because I just have to check out what this main series has to offer. I have been trailing for way too long.